My name is Serena Calloway. I am 34 years old. I am sitting on the back porch of the house we rented together, the one with the cracked terracotta tiles and the rosemary bush that grew wild by the fence. And the afternoon sun is pressing gentle and warm against my face, like a hand that means to comfort me. For exactly 11 seconds, I let myself believe today will be ordinary. 11 seconds. I counted later, when I had nothing else to count. Then it begins. I feel it the way you feel a storm before it arrives. Not from the sky, from the body, from somewhere below the ribs, below the lungs, below the place where you keep the things you are not ready to say out loud. And it picks up quickly, like a pebble rolling from the edge of a mountain, small and almost weightless at first, then faster, then roaring. My hands start to tremble. I set down my coffee mug. The blue one, the one Marcus bought me the Christmas before last. The one with the tiny chip on the rim that I always turned away from my mouth out of habit. And I watch my hands shake against my knees and I think, my body already knows. My body has always known. My mind is always the last to arrive. There is a stillness in my chest, then an explosion. My heart begins pounding so hard I can feel it in my ears, in my teeth, in the backs of my eyes, like drills searching for something deep underground, urgent and relentless, and not at all careful about what they break on the way down. A wave of weightlessness moves through me from my scalp to my feet, and I feel empty, boneless, like a sundress that has slipped off its hanger in a dark closet and pooled silently on the floor, waiting for someone to notice. And then his voice. Not from outside, from inside. That is the most devastating part. Not that he said what he said in the living room of our home at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in March, but that his voice now lives inside my skull, permanent as a scar. I cannot unhear it. I cannot reach in and pull it out. I love her, bouncing wall to wall between my ears, like a ball thrown in a small room, with nowhere to go, nowhere to land. She's the only woman who loves me for who I am. Bounce. I want to be with her. Bounce. Each repetition a little sharper than the one before, to like slicing your finger on a knife so fine you do not feel it cut. You only realize what has happened when you look down and see the blood already moving, already building into something that cannot be stopped. I press my palms flat against my knees to stop the shaking. It does not help. Sounds pull away from me. The neighbor's lawnmower, the birds in the ash tree, the distant murmur of afternoon traffic on Lenora Street, all of it receding like water, pulling back before a wave. And in that silence, images of him and her close around me, like silk being drawn in from every direction, wrapping, tightening, until I cannot tell where I end, and the grief begins. My eyes close. The sting starts. One tear first, carving a careful path down my cheek, like it knows exactly where it is going. Then the others follow, heavier, faster, each one carrying more weight than the one before, as if they have been holding these things for longer than I have. And I think, how long? How long has this been happening while I sat in this same sun, drinking from this same chipped mug, believing I was loved? That is the question that will take me 11 months to fully answer. But let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where the warning signs live, and that is exactly what I want you to see. I met Marcus Delaney on a Wednesday evening in October, 3 years before that afternoon on the porch. I was at a continuing education seminar for work. I am a licensed occupational therapist. I specialize in pediatric sensory processing, and the seminar was held in a hotel conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner and ambition. I had driven 40 minutes in rain and was silently deciding I would leave at the first break. I was sitting in the third row with a cup of terrible hotel coffee cooling in my hand when the man beside me leaned slightly in my direction and said very quietly, "Is yours also somehow both lukewarm and burnt?" I laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one. That was Marcus. He was tall. I noticed because I am 5'10", and I am accustomed to being taller than the people I find myself next to at events like this. He had dark eyes that went warm when he smiled, and a laugh that came from somewhere low in his chest, the kind of laugh that other people in a room turned toward without quite knowing why. He was a project manager for a construction firm. He coached youth soccer on weekends, and he drove a truck that was older than it needed to be, because he told me later he felt bad trading it in. He had had it since college. That detail, for some reason, made me feel safe. We left the seminar at the break, together, though neither of us said we were doing it together. We walked 4 blocks in the October rain and found a diner with red vinyl booths and ate grilled cheese sandwiches and talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know the duration because I was supposed to call my sister Diane at 8 o'clock, and I completely forgot, and she rang me 4 times before I finally stepped outside the diner into the cold air and apologized and told her I had met someone. "You sound different," Diane said. "You sound lighter." I did not think about that word, lighter, for a long time. I wish I had, and the relationship moved the way good things move when you have waited a long time for them. Steadily, warmly, with the feeling of something clicking into place. Marcus remembered everything I told him. The name of my first cat, my complicated relationship with my father, the patient I cried over on a Friday afternoon the first year of my career, a 4-year-old boy named Oliver, who had finally, after 14 months of weekly sessions, reached up and took my hand without flinching. Marcus remembered Oliver. He asked about him months after I had mentioned him only once. He cooked on Sunday mornings, elaborate, unnecessary breakfasts that made the whole apartment smell like browned butter and rosemary. He would put on old Motown records, actual records, that he had a player he'd inherited from his father, and sing badly and deliberately off-key while he cooked, just to make me laugh. He left notes in my coat pockets, small ones, on torn scraps of paper, not declarations, just small, true things. "Watched you sleep for 2 minutes this morning. You looked like you were solving a problem. You have the best laugh in every room you walk into." Things that were specific to me. Things only someone paying attention would know to say. I loved him in the way you love something when you are not yet afraid of losing it. Completely, without the bracing that comes later. In the summer of our 2nd year, we moved in together. The house on Lenora Street, the one with the cracked porch tiles, and the wild rosemary. I remember the first Saturday morning there, standing in the empty kitchen with moving boxes still unopened, and Marcus looking at me with that low, warm smile and saying, "This is ours now." Ours. I remember thinking, yes, this is exactly what ours feels like. I did not know then that a person can use a word like that and mean something entirely different by it than you do. I did not know yet what I was about to learn. The first time I noticed something was different, I told myself I was imagining it. It was a Sunday in September, about 4 months after we had moved into the house on Lenora. Marcus came home from coaching soccer. He coached the under-12 boys team at the community center every Saturday and Sunday morning. And something was different about him. Not dramatically, not obviously. Something subtle and interior, like a room where a piece of furniture has been moved 3 inches, and you cannot name what is wrong, but you feel the wrongness in the back of your molars. He was on his phone more, not conspicuously, not in the way of someone hiding something badly, in the way of someone very practiced at appearing casual. He would set it face down when he came to the table. Before that, he had never cared about his phone at dinner. He had actively preferred leaving it in the other room. I noticed. I said nothing. The second thing was the name Priya. He mentioned her once lightly, the way you mention someone completely unremarkable. Priya from the League is organizing the year-end fundraiser. I said I'd help. That was all. 7 words. Priya from the League. And I stored the name without knowing why. The way you pick up a pebble on a beach and slip it in your pocket without examining it, only to find it later and wonder what made you reach for it. The third thing was the way he started checking his appearance more carefully. I am aware this sounds trivial. I am aware that people are allowed to care about how they look. But Marcus had always been entirely unbothered by mirrors. He was handsome in a way that did not seem to require his attention. Now he paused. In the hallway before leaving. In the bathroom longer in the mornings. Small, new habits that individually mean nothing, and together form a shape. Then the emotional withdrawals began. Not arguments. Not coldness. Something worse, a kind of careful, managed warmth. And the way a person is kind to someone they are planning to leave but haven't yet told. Hugs that lasted exactly the right number of seconds. Responses that were present but not personal. He still cooked on Sundays. He still left notes in my coat pockets. But the notes changed. From, "You have the best laugh in every room," to "Hope your day is great." Generic. Correct. Empty. I told myself, he is stressed. Work is difficult. Everyone goes through flat patches. I am being too sensitive. I am being needy. I am asking too much of a person who is already giving enough. I told myself these things the way you talk to yourself, when you are standing on something that is shifting slowly beneath your feet, and you need to keep standing. The fourth thing, and this is the one I want you to hold closely, the one I want you to carry with you, was what happened with his friends. In the 2 years before this, Marcus and I had attended everything together. His college friends' weddings, work events, his sister Kara's birthday dinners. We were a pair, a unit, naturally assumed. Beginning in October of that year, he started attending things alone. His explanation was always reasonable. "I'll be back early. You'd be bored. It's more of a work thing." Kara specifically said it was just siblings. Every reason made logical sense. Not one of them was true. I found out later, methodically and specifically, that Priya had been at every single event he attended alone during those 4 months. Everyone. The fifth thing was small, and I almost didn't catch it. One night in November, his phone buzzed on the nightstand at 11:49 p.m., and he picked it up so quickly that I felt the mattress move. In 6 seconds, he had read the message, typed a response, and set the phone down again. His breathing changed, not to anxiety, but to something that sounds like the opposite of anxiety. The exhale of a person who has just received something they were waiting for. I lay beside him in the dark, and I thought, I know what that breath sounds like. That is the breath of someone who just heard from someone they want to hear from. But I said nothing. I stared at the ceiling, and I said nothing, and I let 11 more weeks pass. 11 weeks of noticing and dismissing, of evidence accumulating in a drawer I would not open, of choosing, again and again, to believe the most generous possible explanation, because the alternative was something I was not ready to carry, and until the Tuesday in March, when I was not looking for anything, and I heard everything. I want to be very precise about how it happened, because the way betrayal arrives matters. It matters because understanding the mechanism helps you recognize it. It matters because the version where I was a detective who searched and found feels different and less true than what actually happened. I was not looking for anything. It was a Tuesday. I had come home early from work. My last appointment had canceled. A child named Ben who had an ear infection, and I had texted Marcus to say I'd be home by 3 instead of 5:30, and he had not responded, which I noticed, but chose not to examine. I came in through the back door, the one that opens into the kitchen, and I could hear him in the living room. He was on the phone, and his voice was low but not whispering, the voice of someone who believes themselves alone. I stopped in the kitchen doorway, and I did not announce myself. Not because I was trying to hear. I want to be honest about this. I stopped because the tone of his voice caught me. The specific texture of it. A softness that I recognized as intimacy. The kind of intimacy that has nothing to do with volume, and everything to do with how carefully a person chooses their words when they believe only one person can hear them. And I heard his words. I love her. A pause. I know what I need to do. Another pause. She's the only woman who loves me for who I am. His voice dropped further. I want to be with her. I need more time. The kitchen was very bright. Afternoon light in the windows. The blue mug on the counter from this morning. There's the rosemary smell from the garden coming through the cracked window above the sink. All of this completely ordinary and completely unchanged while the ground opened beneath me. I do not know how long I stood there. Time is unreliable in moments like this. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 3 minutes. I know I was still holding my keys because afterward I found them pressed so hard into my palm they had left marks. He came around the corner into the kitchen, and he saw me, and the phone dropped from his hand to his side in a single, instinctive motion, and his face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Shock, calculation, guilt, and then the one I could not forgive, a brief and terrible flicker of relief, as if part of him had been waiting for this moment, as if part of him was glad it was over. So Serena, my name in his mouth, all the weight of what he just said still in the room. How long? I said. It was not a question. My voice was completely level. I did not recognize it as mine. Serena, let me... How long, Marcus? He looked at the window, then at the floor, then finally at me. And I saw in his face what I had been refusing to see for months. Not the guilt of a person who had made a mistake, but the exhaustion of a person who had been managing a secret for a long time and was tired of carrying it. 7 months, he said. 7. I thought about the Sunday in September when he came home from soccer, and something was different. I thought about Priya from the league. 7 words. I thought about the text at 11:49 p.m. and the breath that followed it, and I had been walking through the last 7 months of my life, counting the wrong things. Is it Priya? I asked. A beat. Yes. I placed my keys carefully on the kitchen counter next to the blue mug. I looked at them there. My keys, my mug, my kitchen, my house, for a long moment. Then I looked at him. I need you to leave, I said. Not tonight. Right now. And Marcus Delaney, the man who had told me on a Saturday morning in a house we chose together that this was ours now, picked up his phone from where it had fallen and walked past me out the back door without another word. The rosemary smell remained. The blue mug remained. And I stood in my kitchen in the hazy afternoon light and felt the specific, catastrophic weight of understanding something you cannot ununderstand. Oh, before I tell you what happened next, if this story is reaching you, please like and subscribe. It only takes a second, and it means everything to me. Drop a comment with your city and the time where you are. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to what the next 72 hours actually looked like. The first thing I did was call Diane. Not because I had a plan. Not because I knew what to say. I picked up my phone and I called my sister because she was the first person in my contacts, and I needed to hear a voice that had known me before Marcus Delaney walked into a hotel conference room on a rainy Wednesday in October. She answered on the second ring. Hey, what's... He's been seeing someone else. The words came out flat, practiced sounding, as if I had said them before. 7 months. I just found out. He left. Silence. Then, I'm getting in my car. Diane lives 43 minutes away. She made it in 31. While I waited, I did not cry. I did not sit down. I moved through the house in a way I can only describe as inventory. I walked from room to room, noting what was mine, and what was his, and what was ours. And I understood for the first time how much of the furniture of my daily life I had built around another person, without noticing I was doing it. The records by the player. His. The yellow throw blanket on the couch. Mine. The running shoes by the back door. His. The row of cookbooks above the stove. We had bought those together, one by one, from second-hand shops. What do you do with a thing like that? I stood in the bedroom for 4 minutes staring at the nightstand on his side, the charger still plugged in, and a water glass he had not finished. The small, intimate debris of a shared life. I unplugged the charger. I poured the water down the sink. It was not a grand gesture. It was just the only thing I could figure out how to do. Diane arrived, and she did not say the things people sometimes say. She did not say, "I'm so sorry." She did not say, "You're better off." She came through the front door, and she put both arms around me, and she said quietly, and with complete certainty, "I'm here. You don't have to figure out anything tonight." And I believed her, and I cried. The practical chaos came quickly. By Thursday morning, I had spoken to our landlord about the lease. It was in both our names. By Friday afternoon, I had opened a bank account that was only mine and transferred my portion of our shared account, which came to $4,218. By the following Monday, I had emailed my therapist, a woman named Dr. Okafor, who I had seen for 2 years in my late 20s, and with whom I had let the relationship lapse once things with Marcus felt steady, and she had a cancellation slot on Wednesday at 11 a.m., and I took it without hesitating. Marcus texted me once, on Thursday morning. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I read it 4 times. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and went for a walk that lasted an hour and 20 minutes and covered 6 miles and solved nothing and helped, slightly, in ways I could not yet name. There was one moment in those first days that I will not forget. Saturday evening, 6 days after he left. I was in the kitchen, and making dinner for the first time in 2 years. Pasta. Simple. The first recipe I could remember. And the old Motown record was still on the player, where Marcus had left it, because I had not touched the record player since he left, and I did not know if I would touch it again. And as I stood at the stove, the silence in the kitchen pressed against me in a way that felt enormous and specific and entirely mine. That silence. That was when it became real. Rock bottom did not arrive all at once. It came in waves, the way grief always does, and the waves did not follow a schedule. They arrived at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, when I had been sleeping fine all week. They arrived in the middle of a pediatric session on a quiet Wednesday morning. I was with a 6-year-old named Maisie. We were doing tactile desensitization with kinetic sand, and then suddenly, and without warning, I felt the back of my throat tighten, and my eyes fill, and I had to excuse myself to the hallway for 90 seconds and press both hands against the wall until I could breathe again. They arrived in grocery stores and parking lots, and once, memorably, in the waiting room of my dentist's office, because the song playing softly from the office speaker was one that Marcus and I had listened to on a drive. We took the previous autumn to see the leaves change, and the mind does not distinguish between big griefs and small ones. It keeps a perfect record. The worst nights were the ones where I could not stop replaying. Not the confrontation in the kitchen. I could manage that one. The replaying I could not manage was the one that went further back. That excavated, and that went through every tender moment of the previous 7 months, and asked, was this real, or was this performance? The Sunday breakfasts with the butter and Motown, the coat pocket notes, the voice on the phone at 11:49 p.m. I love her. She's the only woman who loves me for who I am. And the coat pocket note from the week before that said you have the best laugh in every room. Were both true at once? Can a person mean both at once? And which meaning do I keep? The object that broke me open completely was the coat pocket note I found in February, 6 weeks after he left. I was finally, methodically, going through my winter coat, the long gray wool one, to prepare it for the donation pile. I put my hand into the left pocket, and my fingers closed around a folded scrap of paper, and my whole body went cold before I even unfolded it. You carry something rare in you. I don't think you know how rare. I stood in my bedroom holding that piece of paper, and I could not make a sound. No cry came. Nothing came. Just the weight of the thing. The specific cruelty of love that was real, and betrayal that was also real, existing in the same handwriting on the same piece of torn paper. I sat on the edge of the bed. I sat there a long time. Outside, it had started to snow. The light in the room turned white and even and still. A car moved slowly down Lenora Street. The house was completely quiet. I held the note in both hands. I did not fold it back up. I did not throw it away. I just held it and breathed and let the silence hold me in return, the way silence sometimes does when everything else has failed. And that night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since I was 22 years old. I wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. I did not write about Marcus. I wrote about myself, about the version of Serena Calloway who had stood in the kitchen doorway and heard those words and gone very still instead of breaking. And I tried to understand her. I tried to understand the woman who had noticed all those things. The phone, face down on the table, the changed notes, the events attended alone, and had chosen again and again the more generous explanation. I asked myself, why? The answer was not comfortable, but it was the first honest question I had asked in 7 months. If you have ever trusted someone completely and felt that trust destroyed overnight, tell me in the comments. How did you find your way through? What did those first nights feel like? I want to know your story too. And if you are still here with me, hit that like button. Because the next part is where everything begins to shift. The rage came about 3 weeks after the grief, which surprised me. I had expected them together. I had expected the kind of hot, immediate fury that burns itself out quickly. What I got instead was a slow accumulation. Grief first, enormous and primary, and almost entirely private. And then, when the grief had done some of its work and I could breathe again, the rage arrived underneath it, quiet and immovable, like a stone at the bottom of a river. I was angry at Marcus, yes, but the anger at Marcus was almost manageable. Because Marcus had done a thing I could name and understand, even if I could not accept it. At the harder anger, the one that kept me awake, was the anger at myself. At the woman who had noticed and dismissed, who had felt the mattress shift at 11:49 p.m. and had chosen silence, who had watched the coat pocket notes change from specific to generic, and had decided she was asking too much of a person who was giving enough. I began having conversations with Dr. Okafor that went places I had not expected. In our 3rd session, she asked me something I had not been asked before. She asked when I had learned to give people the most generous possible interpretation of their behavior, even when the evidence pointed elsewhere. I said, I don't know. Probably always. She asked, where do you think you learned that? And I thought about my father, who had been intermittently present throughout my childhood, not cruel, not absent, but unreliable in ways that required constant re-explanation if you wanted to maintain your love for him. The sports events he promised to attend and didn't, the weekends that got canceled for work, that may or may not have been work. The way my mother would say quietly, he's trying his best, Serena, in a voice that asked me to believe it, without examining it too closely. I had learned very early to do the emotional labor of converting evidence into innocence. I had learned that love requires charity, and I had applied that lesson, faithfully and at great cost, for 34 years. This was not a comfortable thing to see. It was not something I could unsee. I also had to sit with something else. The missing. That was the part no one warns you about. Not the missing of the relationship in the abstract, but the missing of him specifically. The Sunday mornings, the bad singing, the low laugh that rooms turned toward. I missed those things. I missed them alongside the anger, simultaneously, in a way that felt almost impossible to hold. Dr. Okafor said this is what we sometimes call the double bind of betrayal. You grieve the person who hurt you using the same heart that the person hurt. There is no clean way out, only through. I began to see, in those sessions, how I had been shaped for exactly this kind of wound, how my capacity to rationalize warning signs was not a flaw in my character, but a learned behavior, a thing built into me by years of experience that told me, the people you love will not always show up, and your job is to adjust your interpretation until they do. I had been practicing, unconsciously, for Marcus my entire adult life. Seeing that was devastating. It was also, eventually, the beginning of something. The small, conscious choice I made 7 weeks after Marcus left, on a Sunday morning, when I had not cooked and had not eaten until noon and was still in yesterday's clothes, was this. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I opened a blank document on my laptop, and I wrote a list, not of his red flags, of mine, of the moments where I had known something and chosen not to know it, of the specific language I had used with myself to justify each choice. I printed the list. I taped it to the inside of my kitchen cabinet, where I would not have to look at it unless I chose to. Then I showered. I made eggs. I put on clean clothes. It was a very small choice, but it was the first one in a long time that was entirely mine. The turning point came from a 6-year-old. Maisie, the patient I had nearly cried in front of 2 months earlier during kinetic sand, had been making slow, steady progress throughout the winter on her tactile sensitivities. She was the kind of child who thought out loud, who narrated her experience in real time, with a precision that had always made me admire her. On a Wednesday in late March, exactly 12 months after the afternoon on the porch, we were doing a session with water beads, small, squishy, satisfying, and Maisie was running her hands through them with the focused expression she wore when something hard was becoming less hard, and she looked up at me and said, completely casually, in the way only a child can deliver a devastating truth, "Ms. Serena, so you look better today. You looked sad for a really long time." I blinked. "Did I?" "Yeah," she returned to the beads, "but now you look like you again." I walked to my car after that session, and I sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes and did not move. Like you again. A 6-year-old had looked at me across our Wednesday sessions and tracked the movement of my return to myself and found the words for it before I had. Like you again. That evening, I went home and I cooked. Not pasta, not survival food. I made the elaborate, unnecessary kind of thing. I found a recipe I had bookmarked 2 years ago and never made. A Moroccan chickpea stew with preserved lemons and saffron. I put on music. Not Marcus's Motown. My music. A playlist I had not opened in over a year, because everything I had been organized around him. And I cooked for 2 hours and ate slowly, and did the dishes, and stood at the kitchen window in the dark, and looked at the rosemary growing wild by the fence, and I thought, this house is still mine. Not ours. Mine. The shift was quiet. Not dramatic. Not a declaration. Just a single evening in which I made something good, and ate it alone, and did not feel diminished by the aloneness. The tide had turned. I could feel it in my hands. Still. No more trembling. I want to be precise about the facts of what happened next, because I know how these things can sound if you are not precise, and I am committed to telling you exactly what occurred. In early May, 2 months after Marcus had left, I received an email from his project manager at the construction firm as a woman named Hollis Chen, who I had met twice at company events, and who I knew slightly but not well. The email was professional and brief. She explained that the company was in the middle of a contract dispute, a significant one, involving a construction project in the city's arts district that had experienced a major structural discrepancy, and that Marcus had told her I might be able to help. Specifically, the dispute involved a building that had been partially completed as an adaptive facility for children with sensory processing needs. The interior design and accessibility specifications, written by the client organization's occupational therapist, were at the center of the disagreement. The contractor was claiming the specifications were unclear, and the client was claiming the contractor had deviated from them deliberately to save money. The case was going to mediation. Hollis Chen needed an independent expert review of those OT specifications. She needed someone who could interpret them with authority and explain them clearly to the mediator. Marcus had, apparently, told her that I was exactly the person for this. I sat with this email for 24 hours. I thought about it from every direction. I thought about whether I was being manipulated into something. I thought about whether this was Marcus attempting to reopen a connection between us. I called Diane and read her the email, and she said, very flatly, "This has nothing to do with Marcus. This is a professional opportunity." What does your gut say? My gut said, these are children's specifications. This building was designed for children like Maisie and Oliver and Ben. Whatever is happening between me and Marcus Delaney has no jurisdiction over that. I emailed Hollis Chen and said I would take the engagement. I want to be clear. Marcus was not in the mediation room. He was a project team member, not a party. The parties were the firm's leadership and the client organization. I was engaged as an independent expert witness. I prepared for 3 weeks, reviewing the specifications line by line, cross-referencing them with current OT practice guidelines and the federal standards for accessible design. I prepared a written report of 41 pages, and I arrived at the mediation, with it printed and flagged and organized the way I organize everything, with complete precision. The mediation took place on a Thursday in June, for there were 11 people in the room. The mediator was a man named Gerald Osee, a retired judge with a very still quality about him that I immediately respected. He read my qualifications into the record. He asked me to explain, in plain language, what the specifications required, and whether the contractor's construction had met those requirements. I explained. I spent 45 minutes explaining, and when I was done, the room was quiet in a particular way. The quiet of people who have just understood something they previously had not. The mediator thanked me by name. One of the client organization's board members, a woman named Ruth Ann Bautista, who was in her 70s and wore her silver hair in a braid and sat very straight in her chair throughout. I leaned forward when I finished and said, "That is exactly what we have been trying to articulate for 8 months. Thank you." I said, "Those specifications were written to protect children. They deserve to be explained correctly." The mediation resulted in a settlement. The contractor agreed to remediate the non-compliance sections of the construction at their own cost. The total value of the remediation was approximately $347,000. Every dollar was toward making that building work for the children who needed it. I received my expert witness fee, $2,400 for the engagement, which I donated entirely to a pediatric sensory integration program at a local children's hospital. But here is what I want you to understand. What happened in that room had nothing to do with Marcus. It had nothing to do with him recommending me, or with what I had lost, or with any version of the story where the universe owed me something. I sat in that mediation room and did what I have spent 12 years learning to do. I advocated, clearly and without flinching, for children who deserve access to spaces built correctly for them. Marcus could not have given me that moment. He could only have stepped out of the way. The only person in that room who gave it to me was Serena Calloway. I did not see Marcus in person until 3 weeks after the mediation. We met at a coffee shop on a neutral street. Not Lenora, not anywhere connected to what we had shared. At 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. He had texted me and asked if we could talk, and I had thought about it for a week and then said yes. He looked different, tired, smaller somehow, not in physical terms, but in the way of a person who has been living with consequences. He told me that things with Priya had ended in April. He did not offer details. He told me he had been seeing a therapist. He said he was sorry, not in the quick, reflexive way of a person who wants to close a wound and move on, but with a specific quality of pain that told me he had been sitting with what he had done long enough to really feel it. He looked at the table when he said it. I listened. I let him finish. And then I said something I had thought about carefully. I believe that you're sorry, and I want you to know that what you did had an effect that went beyond us. It made me examine things about myself that I needed to examine. That doesn't make what you did okay, but I'm not carrying it anymore. He looked up from the table. His eyes were wet, and he did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You deserved better." "Yes," I said. "I did." I finished my coffee and I left. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel sad. I felt clean in the specific way of someone who has put something down that they have been carrying too long. The rosemary is still growing wild by the fence at the house on Lenora Street. I renewed my lease without him. In the months after the mediation, the pieces of my life resettled. Not into what they had been before. That is not how it works, and I want to be honest with you about that. They resettled into something new, a configuration I was still learning the shape of. Marcus, as I understood it through people who knew us both, moved to a neighborhood across the city, and he stopped coaching the under-12 soccer team in October. He sent an email to the league, apparently, about personal circumstances. His sister Kara texted me the following January to say she was still thinking about me. That mattered more than I expected. Priya, for her part, I never met. I felt no need to. Whatever she had been to Marcus, whatever her role in those 7 months, was not something I needed to understand through her. She was not the wound. The wound was the 7 months of managed warmth and coat pocket notes and face-down phones, of being loved and also deceived simultaneously, of not knowing which was real until the afternoon sun on the back porch made the truth impossible to deny. Dr. Okafor and I continued meeting every other week through the end of the year. In December, and I told her about the list I had made, the one taped inside my kitchen cabinet, the inventory of my own moments of chosen ignorance. She asked if I still looked at it. I said, "Not anymore." I said, "I think I've memorized it." She smiled. She said, "That is exactly where it needed to end up." In January, 14 months after the afternoon on the porch, I had dinner with a woman named Josephine. Jo, who I had met through my colleague at the practice. Jo was funny and unsentimental, and had been through her own version of this years earlier, and had come out on the other side with a clarity I found bracing and useful. We became, over dinner, and then many subsequent dinners, genuinely close friends. She said to me one evening, over her second glass of water and my first cup of tea, something I think about often, as she said, "The thing about surviving something like this is not that you become someone who can't be hurt anymore. It's that you become someone who can tell the difference between a person who is genuinely trying and a person who is performing trying. And that is a thing that protects you forever. I wrote that down when I got home. I still have it. The closing scene between Marcus and me was the coffee shop on a Saturday morning, and I have already told you what was said. I want to tell you one more thing about it, because I think it matters. When he said, "You deserved better," I did not feel surprised. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel the need to add anything or take anything away. I simply felt the truth of it settle in the room between us, like something that had been true for a long time, and had finally been said. And some truths wait. You just have to be patient enough to still be standing when they arrive. If you liked how this ended, not with a fight, not with a breakdown, but with quiet dignity and truth, then subscribe and check the description. I have more stories just like this one waiting for you. Now let me tell you the last two things. If I could sit across from the woman I was at the beginning of this story, the one standing in the kitchen doorway, with her keys pressed too hard into her palm, this is what I would say. I would say, "You are not foolish for having loved him completely. You are not naive for having believed the notes in the coat pockets and the Sunday morning breakfasts and the memory he kept of a 4-year-old boy named Oliver who finally reached up and took your hand. Love is not foolish, and the capacity to love someone fully and without the bracing that comes from having been hurt before, that is not a weakness. It is one of the harder, rarer things a person can manage. But I would also say, you knew. You knew in September when the phone went face down on the table. You knew at 11:49 p.m. when the mattress shifted. You knew when the notes changed from, "You carry something rare in you," to "Hope your day is great." You knew, and you translated that knowing into the most generous possible explanation. And I understand exactly why you did that. Because you had been practicing that translation your entire life. Because somewhere along the way, someone taught you that love requires you to do that work. Quietly, without complaint, without asking the person you love to explain the evidence. And that lesson is the thing I wish someone had told you was optional. You are allowed to trust your own perception. You are allowed to say, "This does not add up, and I would like to understand why," without being afraid that asking the question will destroy the thing. If the relationship cannot survive an honest question, then the relationship was already not what you thought it was. I think about the Sunday mornings a lot, the record player, and the bad singing, and the browned butter. I do not think about them with anger anymore. I think about them with a clear-eyed sort of tenderness for who we were before, and for the fact that those mornings were real, even inside a story that was also not what it appeared. What I would tell you is this: the warmth was real, and the warning signs were also real. Both things were true at once. Your job is not to pretend one of them wasn't there. Your job is to hold both and let them inform you. That is what it means to protect yourself without closing yourself. I am not the woman who sat on that porch anymore. I am also, in some essential way, still her. What changed is not the openness. It is the honesty. I can love completely, and I can also see clearly. Those two things are not opposites. I spent a long time believing they were. If you are reading this and something in this story sounded familiar, not like a story you heard once, but like a story you are living right now, I want to help you see the specific patterns that I missed. when someone begins attending social events alone after years of attending them together, and their reasons always make logical sense individually. That pattern matters. Their single explanations are usually plausible. It is the accumulation that tells you something true. Similarly, when the communication in a relationship shifts from specific and personal to correct and generic, when someone who used to know all your details starts giving you responses that could apply to anyone, that is not just a flat patch. That is a person whose primary emotional attention has moved somewhere else. Pay attention when someone who never cared about their phone suddenly cares very much about its position. Pay attention when warmth begins to feel managed rather than natural. When a person is kind in ways that are technically present, but somehow not personal. And pay attention, most of all, to the moments when your own gut says something is different, and your mind immediately begins the work of explaining it away. And that translation, the one that converts evidence into innocence, is something many of us learned early and practice without knowing we are practicing it. Recognizing that you are doing it is the first and most important step. You are not imagining things. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking too much. If you are recognizing these patterns in your own relationship, here are concrete things you can do that are grounded, practical, and dignified. First, trust the data, not just the explanations. When behavior changes in a consistent pattern over time, that pattern is information. Document it, not obsessively, but plainly. Write down what you noticed and when. This is not paranoia. This is the same rigor you would apply to any other important area of your life. Second, re-establish access to your own financial independence if it has narrowed. Know what accounts exist, what they contain, and that you have direct access. Not because you plan for failure, but because financial clarity is a form of clarity about yourself, and it belongs to you regardless of your relationship status. Third, maintain the relationships, friends, family, professional, that existed before this relationship. People who knew you before know you in a way that matters. When you feel confused about your own perception, those people are anchors. Fourth, speak with a therapist or counselor who is specifically yours. Not couples-focused, but individual, like a space that belongs entirely to your own account of your own experience, is one of the most valuable things you can have when you are trying to trust your own perception again. And if you are already on the other side of this, if you are the woman who already went through the 3 a.m. replaying and the grocery store grief and the 40 minutes of journaling that you hadn't done since you were 22, I want you to hear this directly. Surviving what happened to you is not the whole story. It is not what defines you. The fact that you loved someone completely and they did not protect that love, that is a thing that happened to you. It is not a verdict on your worth or your judgment or your future. You are allowed to be tender with yourself about the parts where you chose the generous explanation, that you learned that in circumstances that required it of you. You are also allowed, now, today, with everything you know, to learn something different. What you do next is the story that matters. She carried everything she had lost forward as a lantern and walked